Hello, my name is Mark Deegan, Director of Corporate Marketing with ColorID. Welcome to part 3 of our summer webinar series titled, We Like It Here, Desktop ID Software. Today, David Stallsmith, who is the Director of Product Management, will be reviewing all the best-in-class options for us today. We'll be recording and sharing this webinar. Please feel free to forward it to your peers within the industry. I'll also be monitoring the Q&A portion of the webinar. Feel free to send all of your questions, and we will cover those at the end of today's session. If you happen to miss part 1 or 2 presented last week, we are happy to share those with you. Please submit a request to sales@colorid.com. And lastly, don't miss out on the remaining webinars for our summer webinar series. We still have a lot to talk about, including topics like printer fleet management, contactless cards and credentials, as well as printer badges. So, with that being said, let's jump into today's webinar. David, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Mark, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Welcome to We Like It Here, Desktop ID Software. And depending on how you say that, it can make more or less sense. There are all the webinars Mark just referred to, so we'll skip that slide. So desktop software does make cards, and it does some other things. And it's pretty familiar stuff because it is almost everything. Desktop software is used by just about everybody that makes ID cards until just the last few years. There has been very little alternative to having software right on your PC. And the process you all know. If you want a demo, you request it, you download it, you install it on your desktop. If you like it, you buy a license, and you can, once you're ready to start using it, you connect to your database, you configure it, you make your templates, and you start printing cards. When you need updates, normally you have to download those either from the manufacturer's site or your reseller site, wherever. And it's a good idea to always get the support plan, which are usually very inexpensive, because with desktop software, you pay for it, most of it right away at the beginning. So all that is very familiar. So what's good about desktop? All the things that we know and love about it. It prints, it encodes cards, of course, attractively priced. It is made up of familiar interfaces. The process is also very familiar. It connects to on-prem databases very easily because it's an on-prem product, and it offers strong support for local devices. Printers, encoders, cameras, signature capture, all plug into your Windows PC, which is where your desktop software works. So it's all Windows, everything's running on Windows, and your IT people aren't too involved. They might be a little bit here and there around a network issue, or just allowing you to put that license on your PC, but compared to some of the other types of ID software products, desktop software is very easy for the IT people to support. Now, what it doesn't do so much, and we first started hearing these requests for additional features over 10 years ago. We want more comprehensive reporting. Well, not really what desktop software does. Can we do these things? Multiple profiles for cardholders? Well, not really. Store and communicate cardholder data with other databases? Yeah, and sometimes history of cards produced, not necessarily huge support for that. And then all the fancy cloud features that we've all been hearing about, that is not in your desktop ID software. All those things, including calculating fees for replacement cards, would kind of fall under identity management, which is a different world. And that was what Todd talked about in our second session, identity management. He talked primarily about CardExchange Cloud, and it does do all these things and a bunch more stuff, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Desktop software does support many types of printers. It will read and encode your contactless chip cards, but you have to read the specs for the software, because typically the ID software supports a printer and an encoder by manufacturer and often by model. So you have to make sure things line up if you plan on doing inline chip reading and coding. One nice thing about the new desktop ID software products is there are no more dongles. Usually the manufacturers issue license keys that you receive by email. You keep track of that key. If you lose it, your inbox gets cleaned out, something happens to that PC, you contact the manufacturer and they registered, if you registered your product, or they have ways of tracking it. The different companies handle this differently. They can send you the same or new license key. If you move your software from PC to PC, you just download the software again to the new machine and then use the license code. And so I think one company supports up to 5 PC changes per year. So that hopefully you don't ever have to do that, but sometimes there is a lot of movement for various reasons. So all of that is a lot easier. You're not trying to keep track of a hardware dongle. So just to back up for a minute, and I mentioned the cloud, and we like it here because the cloud is there, desktop software is here. Just some of the differences, because there has been a lot of talk about cloud ID software. When the software is on-prem, it will connect usually from the PC to a server and back. Data goes back and forth. Usually the server connections are either over ODBC or file transfers. I mean, right there's a 2013 Windows ODBC driver, and it should look pretty familiar because it has looked like that for a long time. Now, if you're using the cloud service for your ID card production, usually they come with RESTful APIs, and that is a modern and very nice way to connect to things, but you're connecting from the cloud to other things. Also, sometimes cloud connects using ODBC or file transfers. This is a picture of the traditional desktop architecture. One PC, one printer. Now I'm going to talk about a product here that gives you a few more options than that. But you open the application on your PC, it's fast, the login is simple, the application data is on your PC mostly, and you connect to external databases from your PC. Sometimes the software will install with its own database. If you have a smaller application, for example, you have a smaller institution size, it's not a huge number of database entries that you're managing, or if you want to set up a second workstation for visitors or conference attendees, you might choose to use a less fully featured ID software that installs with its own database. And there you just enter people as you go, and they sit in that database on that PC, and that's very easy. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. But because it's on your PC, it's very quick. You're not waiting for anything to travel over the network. I notice even in my various cloud applications I use in my office work every day, things that used to be faster are now slower. I can get to them from more places. They're more versatile, but I'm waiting more. Cloud applications have their own databases up there, and there's often a little bit of connection time. The connections can be more complicated because they're traveling over a network and through firewalls. You do get to those cloud software services through a browser, which is handy. But the browsers are not too awesome necessarily for supporting local software. Usually, local hardware, there usually has to be some kind of client on the PC to work from the cloud. Now, there are some manufacturers that are experimenting with no client on the PC, but it's only usually for the most simple applications. By the time you get to reading and writing contactless card data inline, there's almost always something on the local PC anyway. So let's start talking about CardExchange Producer. It has been around for a while. It is now in version 10, full desktop version. It's very strong at encoding. I'll show you a few things about that, but it does not encode or read HID contactless smart cards. HID keeps how those cards are programmed and encrypted and secured to themselves. And CardExchange and most other software companies have not fully integrated the HID encoding modules. There are other ways to approach that, and we can talk about that too. There's also a network version. So who is CardExchange? Well, it's a company started in the Netherlands. They moved to the US 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. They've been in ID software business for 20 years. It's what they do. They don't really do anything else. They have users all around the world in corporate, higher ed, and other markets. And because all they make is software, they support pretty much every major maker of devices: printers, cameras, some fingerprint devices, some signature capture devices. Their software, CardExchange software, works with everything, mostly. They have a typical but very nice card designer built in, and there's a wizard to walk you through this if you need some help with it, or if you want to just open this up and go to work. It's very easy to use. Everybody's used to designing templates. One thing to know, when you're moving from one make of software to another, the templates are not going to transfer. You will be redesigning your templates in the new software. However, if it's an easy to use interface, hopefully that's not too hard of a job. So CardExchange Producer has a card encoding or reading wizard, and you just start here and add items as you go. It walks you through everything you need to read, write, encode MyFair, DesFire. It'll read procs. And so if you have custom DesFire applications, for example, CardExchange Producer will support that. It is pretty involved, and the people at ColorID are well trained and experienced in setting these things up. So if you get into a custom encoding job, especially for DesFire, feel free to reach out to ColorID for help. MyFair is much simpler, but when you get to DesFire, there are a lot of decisions and things to make, terms to understand. The software handles it very nicely, but there's a lot to learn there about how to make it work. Now, one thing that is unique about CardExchange Producer is there is a network version. So even though it is a fully desktop software, it has some add-on features that make it act like a network software service. So in the case of the network version of Producer, you're going to install a license server either on a PC or on a server, and it will manage centrally template storage, user login info, and application data. So anything you're doing in CardExchange at any PC on the network is connected to that license manager, and it manages a number of concurrent licenses. So if you have 3 people that need to print cards or 3 locations, you would buy 3 concurrent licenses, a master and 2 clients. You install CardExchange Producer on as many PCs as you want. You can put it on your PC at home. You can put it on a PC across campus. The software just sits there, but when you log in and that software is pointed to the license manager, then it will make sure that up to 3 people at a time are able to actually use CardExchange. So centrally managing the licenses gives you the capability of using that software anywhere, but only having to pay for as many licenses as you know you will need at a time. Another very nice add-on is the print server, which is not a new concept, but it's a software product. You install it on a PC. You have one print server connected to one printer, but you can install up to 4 print servers on a PC and support up to 4 printers from that PC, each print server software supporting a printer. So that's kind of cool. You can support more than that too if you're not encoding. So the idea is the print server receives print jobs from the print client, which is the producer, the desktop producer anywhere on the network, or from the dispatcher. We'll talk about that in a minute. Collects the jobs and executes them. So if you send 100 print jobs to the print server, the print client absorbs them, and then it'll become available again after all the jobs have been received. So you send 100 print jobs to the print server. As soon as they're sent and that communication is complete, you get your desktop producer back to do whatever else you want to do, send another print job to another printer. In other words, it's a way of offloading from the client, from the desktop software to the print servers, which will then manage the job for that printer. And then one more nice add-on is the dispatcher, which gives you load balancing printing like you need for print farming. So if you have 4 printers and they're each connected to a print server, that could be 1 PC or 4 PCs, however you want to do it. If you send a print job of 500 cards to the dispatcher, it caches those 500 jobs and it distributes them to the available print servers. Then when the print server is done, the dispatcher assigns a new print job to the print server that is available now. If one card printer stops, usually a card jam or something like that, the dispatcher immediately notices it and assigns the rest of that job to the next available printer. And then the dispatcher will inform the print client that sent the print job about the error. So instead of the job ending up at printer number 4, you will find out back at your desktop that your job started on 4, but something happened and it finished on 3. So you have a record of what happened there. Between the network print server and the dispatcher, you have the ability to send jobs over the network to machines anywhere on your network, and then the dispatcher to do the load balancing anytime you have a need to move from one printer to another and handle jobs across a variety of printers. So some really nice features available for CardExchange Producer. CardExchange does support the widest range of printers and readers and coders because, like I said, they just make software, so it has to work with everybody's stuff. As far as encoders go, OMNIKEY seems to be getting very popular for inline reading and writing to contactless cards, not just HID. OMNIKEY will read and write to anything, and they're available in many other printers other than just HID. But CardExchange also supports ELATEC, SpringCard, Identiv, Zebra, DualEye, a lot of different encoders depending on the variety, the printer and which encoder is available for those printers. But like I said before, if you need to read the secret card data, in other words, the programmed card ID from HID iClass CIOS or HID Testfire, you need HID software. So CardExchange can always read the card serial number from any of these contactless cards, but that HID data requires something to decrypt the data, and CardExchange will not do that. So often, if you have HID cards, you want CardExchange software, you have iClass cards, you will probably work with the card serial number and a cross-reference sheet where the card serial number is captured during encoding or during printing, and then you upload a cross-reference sheet of your cards so that your database can link the card ID that was programmed by HID to the card serial number. That's a very common practice with Seaboard schools, for example, and certain kinds of cards, but other types of institutions do it too. So a lot of workarounds, a lot of ways to make things work. But anyway, editions. So all these desktop software products come in a variety of editions, and there are just a couple things that make a big difference. If you notice the professional edition here, which is priced well below $1,000, it's a single user. It supports all the databases that the higher editions support: SQL, MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, DB2, a lot of different softwares, databases. And then the other thing in CardExchange is automatic photo cropping and automated printing, which is, some of the things we just talked about, are in the base version, the most economical version that a higher ed institution would consider. If you need to encode MyFair Classic, then you will need the business edition, or if you want to read prox cards in your printer, then you'll need the business edition, which is now available with the network features. And then if you need to encode MyFair Desfire, you will need the enterprise edition. So if you're not encoding Desfire, business edition will work fine. If you're not reading or writing MyFair or prox, then the professional edition will work fine. However, professional does not have the option of the network features. So talking about HID encoding, HID AsureID. Now this product has been around for quite a while, but it is well supported, and the reason primarily is because HID, well, they sell a lot of it, but they have built their desktop encoding and reading into AsureID, and so this is the main reasons for its existence. So if you have HID cards and you want to read them in line, and you need desktop software, you should take a look at AsureID. It installs very easily if you need it. Like I said, if you have a simple installation for a different kind of card and it's not going to connect all your major databases, you could drop AsureID on one of your PCs. It'll set up its own access database, and you can just run that separately and have it up and running in very little time. It's very quick. Again, there's a license key, no USB dongle. Let's talk for a moment about HID encoding, because for inline encoding and even at the desktop, HID uses the 5127 made by OMNIKEY, which is an HID subsidiary. So HID makes two encoders called the 5127. They call one an encoder, but the more formal name is the 5127 CK Mini. And then the other is called the programmer, and its more formal name is the CP1000. So the encoder reads prox, it reads card serial number from every card in the 13.56 megahertz range, and it reads and writes to MyFair and MyFair Desfire. The programmer is the HID specific device. It contains a SAM, which is a secure access module that stores the HID keys on the board of the encoder. So it can read and write prox. It reads card serial number from all the cards, just like the one above, but it also reads and writes HID SIO data, and that is the secret data to MyFair Desfire and also iClass and CIAS. I should have written that in there. So if you want to encode HID data to CIAS cards, you can do that with the CP1000 and AsureID, or called the programmer. Or if you just want to read iClass cards, but you actually want the card ID number as it goes through the printer, then you can use AsureID and the CP1000, the programmer. I can also mention that if you have Fargo Connect, it does all the same stuff because it uses the same SDK to read the card data, so another HID product. So HID does offer good support for its product line. The CP1000 programmer, iClass CIAS, MyFair, Desfire EV1, prox, and then all of those are the HID, the SIO, the secure identity object. That is the way that HID readers decrypt the data when you present one of these cards to a reader at a door. And then also, these will read and write HID data. If you buy your cards from HID, like if you bought unprogrammed CIAS cards, you can support them. You can encode them with a CP1000 in line, or iClass. Like if you want to write your own kind of data, you can do that. If you don't buy HID cards, then you have to buy credits from HID to encode that data to a different kind of card like Desfire from another company. So it gets a little complicated if you try to get away from HID while you're still using HID stuff, but there are ways to do that. So Zebra CardStudio, it is now version 2.0, which is their new version. This was Card 5. I don't know if any of you remember Card 5. It was a very capable software developed, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And it was a very good product. Zebra picked it up. They've rewritten it. It's desktop software. It makes cards. The two things that it can do that are really salient features is it will encode UHF. So if you wanted to see cards 30 feet away from a reader, you need a UHF reader and you need a UHF chip in your card. And there are many types. You can get procs with UHF, you can get iClass with UHF. And now you have another chip in that card that can be read far away, and you need to program or capture that UHF encoding. Usually it's electronic product code, EPC data, kind of like a barcode, but you also can write things to that. CardStudio will do that. CardStudio will also encode MyFair and DesFire in Zebra printers, the ZC350, ZXP7, ZXP9. So if you have one of those printers and you want to encode MyFair and DesFire, CardStudio will do that for you. It does have auto crop feature for photos, which is handy. And they just introduced mobile ID. Well, you know, it's pretty simple. It starts at around a nickel, but you print the card and then you design a mobile ID that'll show up on a mobile device that you can send from CardStudio to the email addresses that you enter for your card holders. So you get cards on your phone. It's static. There's nothing too fancy here, but it does have a QR code. So it's something to work with if you're looking for a way to easily and inexpensively identify people with a very simple ID card look on their phone with a barcode. Maybe CardStudio is the thing that you would like. It also attractively priced and in 3 versions. Standard is pretty simple for higher ed market. Enterprise starts to do everything you might need, and then with professional, full smart card encoding, MyFair plus DesFire, and that really is the thing that makes the difference there. So enterprise would probably work for a lot of folks that aren't doing contactless card reading or encoding, but if you're doing any of that, you'll need professional. And then a few more things about desktop software. A lot of schools use their access control system to make their ID cards. The badging modules built into Linnell S2, Secure RS2, those are 3 that just came up this last week in our conversations at ColorID. These pretty much use desktop software, and you install the client for Linnell or Secure, and there's a badging module you access. It's often an existing ID software product that's been white labeled and integrated into the access control system like AsureID or EpiSuite, which is a really old software. We encounter that more times than you would expect. It works, and because it's integrated into the access control system, as soon as that card number is captured, either at the desktop or in the printer, it goes to the access control system, and that's very cool. But the drawback is that these are security systems, and access control, physical access control systems, PACs, don't connect well to other systems. So if you set everybody up in Secure and you make your badges from there, it's kind of hard to get data out of Secure and send it to your other systems. Usually at that point, the access control system is the last stop on the line, or nearly, because it's data comes in, it doesn't go out. I won't name that analogy, but it's familiar enough. So it works, it's secure. The other kind of a challenge we've seen with the access control software is they don't support reading and encoding contactless chips very well. You may have something that it's, you know, in fact, we went through this just last week with an access control company and a school, and they said, well, you know, we need an encoder for our printer. We sent them one. They tried it. They said, oh, it doesn't work. And I looked, they're in the specs of the access control software. It said that that would work, but it didn't work. So we sent them another one for procs. Procs works. So even though that school has procs and a more secure technology, they can only read the prox chip in the printer with that software, because that's as far as that access control system software got in its development. Well, we'll support prox. Everybody has prox. So that's kind of the downside. We've come across that with many institutions, and often, you know, something will work for a while and then it stops working, and before long you're back to tapping your cards at the desktop to get those ID numbers into the system. It's not the worst, but it is a little bit of a ragged edge for access control systems producing badges. A couple other products here that are worth mentioning: Vision Database, IDMS. Also, it's been around for a while. They support contactless encoding. They're well integrated with Vision Database Pocket Tracker, which many of you have probably heard of. One thing Vision Rapid Card supports very well are things around the mag stripe and ISO numbers. They've always been very involved in working with institutions and their ISO numbers. So if you need, for example, Mod 10 check digit algorithm to generate custom ID, it's built into IDMS. So if you're doing a lot with ISO numbers and you need more robust support, perhaps IDMS is something to look at. I think they also have a new version coming out in the next, I don't know, 6 months or so. We'll find out what that looks like, but IDMS has been doing a good job for a while. And then CardPresso is a relatively, well, it's not real new, but it's a little newer than some of the other products. And one thing that's cool about CardPresso, makes cards, does everything else, it runs on a Mac. So if somebody in your office is dying to switch everything over to Apple, CardPresso is your software. Now you will need, there are a limited number of printers that have Mac drivers, and we'll talk about that on the printer session in next week. So tune in if you're interested in more things about Mac. So one more question we often get, well, we're using something like CloudCard. We're downloading photos, and how will that work with our desktop software? Well, it'll work very well, because if you're using desktop software right now, you're storing your photos somewhere. They're either being stored in a database or they're being stored in a local folder. CloudCard and other online photo submission software products download the photos to a folder or a database. So just as you capture photos now using a camera and put them in a, you know, wherever you store them, CloudCard will do that for you. And by the way, ColorID does also offer and support CloudCard. We love working with these guys. So I wanted to mention that. But if you switch from one ID software to another and you were considering using an online photo or are already using online photo download, it will work. So here is a cheat sheet. Last slide. We're almost there. If you need lower price, fast setup, especially for a smaller implementation, AsureID Enterprise, it'll do that for you. If you read HID cards or encode them with HID printers, then AsureID Exchange, the top of the line AsureID product, will do that for you. The versatile any printer and encoder software, winner in that category is CardExchange Producer. And then desktop with network, the only entry there is CardExchange Producer with network. If you have Zebra printers, and especially, if you have Zebra printers and you want to work with MyFair or DeskFire, you will most likely need CardStudio, although CardExchange also supports Zebra. But if you want UHF, that is a CardStudio specialty. And then if you really love Mac, there's CardPresso. So with all of that, that's a quick tour of desktop software. Mark, any questions?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I actually have a question. And, you know, they always say there's no such thing as a dumb question. So, you know, be easy on me here. But the way that I'm like, you know, listening to this presentation is like, I'm trying to like grasp the concept. Like, it sounds like when a printer manufacturer creates their own ID software, it sounds like the printer that's going to be able to do everything, all those features that software, you know, is meant to do and is on the product select, the printer that you have to make it work is that manufacturer's printer. Is that pretty much accurate, or?
No, that's quite accurate. The manufacturers make sure that their software supports everything they sell as well as they can.
Mm-hmm.
The outlier there is CardExchange, because they don't make anything else but the software. So they have worked really hard over the years to make sure they support as many different printers and encoders as possible. And in some cases, they do a better job than the manufacturer's software offering. But really, the best thing is to approach each situation and all the variables individually, because it's easy to make a blanket statement. I do it all the time. But really, every situation needs to be individually evaluated. Here at ColorID, we work with all the products we talked about today, all the printers on the market pretty much. We'd be happy to have, and we do have, these conversations with people every single day.
It's really hard to, put if one of your friends, you and your peers is working on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast, you guys happen to be using the same, integrator, and they have really good success with AsureID, doesn't mean that you, in fact, would be the best bet for AsureID. We'd have to look at your entire ecosystem from start to finish, is what you're saying, and then we could make a couple of options or suggestions, right?
Yeah, am I supposed to answer a question or ask a question?
No, that's just the public relations marketing person coming out at me.
No, you're exactly right. With a lot of experience too on that. I mean, we go into situations, we're having conversations, and we think, oh, this will work great, because we have an experience with software, hardware, and we install something, and then we find out, oh, there's another variable we didn't even know to ask about, or that the end user didn't know to tell us about, and that changes everything. And so there are a lot of subtleties to get everything lined up and working well, especially as you get into the more complex procedures.
Gotcha. One other thing that came in on the question line was, how are these desktop solutions serviced or warranted over the course? Does ColorID, are we the front line and the only line, or are there SMAs for these things? What's the general practice for desktop?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I said early in the presentation that it's always a good idea to buy the support service, and that's usually an annual fee. It's usually very little money per desktop license, but that covers you for all the upgrades and updates. And as fast as Windows changes stuff, and you need these. And so a good software company is issuing updates and patches to cover what Windows breaks on a regular basis. So maybe CardPress was ahead of the curve there with Mac, but honestly, they do a lot of updates too. So I'm curious to know what their experience is. ColorID is always available. It's both, we'll help you install it. We'll take your questions. We have good familiarity and experience with all these products, and we can answer most of the questions, if necessary, remote into your PC, because that's where the software is, and help find any problems that you're having, or help you with configurations. But if we do get stumped, or if there's something above and beyond what can be handled by ColorID, then we have good relationships with all these companies, and we get direct technical support from them, and can bring that back to you. You don't have to be worried about how you're going to contact the manufacturer, how long you have to sit on hold. ColorID answers the phone, and we get the answers, and we get back to you.
Perfect. In regards to CardStudio product, is that a virtual credential, like a visual ID only, or can it be used as a physical access ID?
It's a picture. It's very simple. It's just it's a picture. It's on your phone. So it's very inexpensive. It's very easy to work with, but it is also limited. So, you know, if you need a QR code for something simple and low security, could be a great solution.
Beautiful. And then lastly, is Dispatcher an add-on or is that included?
Yeah, no, so Producer is the desktop software. Then you can get Producer Network version, which adds the license server, the central license manager. And then Print Server is an add-on, one per printer, if you want to use that network, because then any PC with a printer attached becomes an endpoint for your print jobs. And then Dispatcher, usually you could buy one, even if you have several printers, you could buy one Dispatcher, but that's also an add-on.
That's it, Dave. You're done with the questions. So well done, as always. All right. Thanks, everyone, again, for attending today's webinar. We really appreciate your time a lot. And again, don't miss out on the remaining webinars. Please sign up for those if you haven't done so already at ColorID.com. See you all this Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Goodbye.